Today I'll be going over Chapter 7 of Alanna Nash's book, The Colonel. Chapter 7 is titled, One Born Every Minute. Nash says in February 1935, while Royal American was at the Florida State Fair in Tampa, Parker walked over to the Have a Tampa cigar stand hoping to score some free samples. There was Marie Frances Mott, a beautiful cigar stand worker with a flirtatious reputation. She was immediately drawn to the well-dressed man and happily gave him the attention and likely the free samples he wanted. She asked, "You work on the Carnival?" And suddenly Parker was interested in more than just cigars. Nash writes, quote, Tom Parker had perhaps shown no interest in girls to his friends back in Holland, but on the Johnny J. Jones show, said Jack Kaplan, he demonstrated that the old circus maxim, a pussy pulls stronger than an elephant, was true. Like any good con man, Tom Parker was a charmer, and what he didn't see at first was that Marie Mott, in laughing at his jokes and complimenting his clothes, was conning him right back. 3 months away from her 27th birthday and a full 13 months older than Parker, she, like him, had a secret in her soul, end quote. Marie Mott was born in Pembroke, Florida in 1908 into a poor, hardworking family. Her father was a Spanish-American war veteran, blacksmith, iron worker, and part-time farmer, and the family of 8 moved whenever the land stopped producing. Marie was very different from her calmer sisters Lula May and Gertrude. As a teenager, she was restless and high energy and rebellious, which worried her strict, moral-minded mother. She kept some of her strict Baptist upbringing, like avoiding alcohol, but she was still fiery and outspoken, especially when it came to her language. Marie's daughter-in-law, Sandra Polk Ross, remembers, she was a piss cutter, and Granny Mott couldn't do a thing with her. Still, Marie's beauty helped her become a Gasparilla Parade Queen candidate, and she proudly rode on the lead float during Tampa's big pirate-themed celebration. Ross said, Colonel fell in love with Marie because he liked her spirit, and she had that flash in her eye, too. He thought she was the prettiest thing he ever saw. Nash writes, quote, Marie Mott was not only pretty, she carried the exciting stigma of a divorcee. Where Tom Parker was still relatively inexperienced in matters of sex, I knew he had a girl for a short while in North Carolina, said Jack Kaplan. Marie had deserted her husband, Willett Man Eagler Sayre, in Jacksonville only a month earlier. Furthermore, she had another husband, Robert Burrell Ross, in her past, and on the day she first met Tom Parker, a nearly 10-year-old son, Robert B. Ross Jr., to raise. And the comely Marie had yet another surprise. Asked in 1983 about his sister's family, Marie's younger brother, Elisha Mott Jr., known as Bitsy, said, she had 2 children by Ross. The other one died at birth. We have no record of it, end quote. Nash says the first of Bitsy's claims may have been true, but the last one wasn't. Bitsy Mott knew that William Billy Ross, born in Tampa in 1928, was still alive. Billy was born with a club foot, but was an otherwise healthy and beautiful child. Marie and Ross had already separated when Billy was born. She may have been concerned that having a, quote, handicapped child may interfere with her chances of landing another man. So, in 1929, when Billy was just a year old, she sent him to the Florida Children's Home, where he was later adopted by a farming family and treated badly. Since Marie was off living freely, her mother, Granny Mott, raised Bob Jr. with help from Bitsy. Since Bitsy was only 7 years older, he saw Bobby more like a younger brother to guide and protect. Bobby was still living with his grandparents when Marie married a second time and moved to Jacksonville with Sayre. But she soon moved back to Tampa, and a few months after meeting Parker, she called Sayre to end the marriage, but his mother answered. Court records show that Mrs. W.S. Sayre reported, she said she was in love with another man, but Marie left it to Sayre to file for divorce, which he did, and the court eventually found her guilty of, quote, willful, continuous, and obstinate desertion of the complainant, end quote. The divorce was granted on March 18, 1936. Marie Mott Ross Sayre was now free to marry Tom Parker. But what truly brought them together? Perhaps Parker knew that an American wife and stepson could protect him if immigration ever became a problem. Sandra Polk Ross says, I believe they were in love, plain and simple. He was a fine cut of a man in those early pictures, and she was such a handsome woman and so trim. Marie was a hot number when she was young, and he had her on a pedestal. pedestal. Nash says Parker may have needed Marie less for romance and more for comfort and stability. After years alone and repeated career rejection, he seemed to crave the kind of reassurance his mother once gave him. Nash writes, quote, Marie, whose name so resembled his mother's and who was older than he and more seasoned in various ways of the world, was a perfect choice for a surrogate mother and lover. And she had one more irresistible quality. Marie Mott was an exceptional cook, specializing in the heavy southern fare that Parker had become accustomed to in his travels. Surprisingly, he let Marie all but rule him, end quote. Byron Raphael said, I think he loved her as much as he could love any woman, but later on, when I knew him, I got the distinct impression that he might not have liked women sexually. In fact, I was certain that the Colonel was asexual. He couldn't relate to a soft, romantic woman, but he could somehow relate to this bossy kind of lady. She had a coarse, dominant quality about her, and that apparently attracted him. Nash says Marie may have seen Parker as a lifeline. During the Depression, with little education and a child to support, a man who showed real interest in her probably felt like a chance at stability. Her adventurous side made Parker appealing too. His unconventional traveling lifestyle suited her, and in that sense, they made a good team. Parker would later tell the Associated Press that they got married in 1932 while wintering with a carnival in Tampa, Florida. Nash writes, quote, or did they? As usual with the saga of Tom Parker, the most mundane of facts often proved to be illusions. Parker was still in the service in 1932, stationed at Fort Barrancas. Certainly he might have married Marie during a furlough or in his months of desertion from the Army. But the Florida Office of Vital Statistics, checking the years of 1927 to 1946, finds no record of marriage between the two, end quote. Bitsy Mott claimed that the marriage happened in Alabama in 1935, which is a date that Parker had also cited. But Bitsy didn't remember the ceremony, saying, I guess they went to a justice of the peace or a judge and a party was too much money. And records show Marie wasn't divorced from Sarah until 1936. There's no official marriage license for Tom Parker and Marie in any state where they lived or spent much time. Nash says Parker was unusually nervous about legal paperwork, possibly because it could expose his immigration status, and because of that, he and Marie may never have legally married. But Byron Raphael and Gabe Tucker believe Tom and Marie really were legally married. They said Parker strongly disapproved of couples living together unmarried, possibly because of the shame surrounding his own parents' forced marriage. Nash writes, quote, the best guess, then, is that the Parkers simply laid their hands on the Showman's League Bible, said a few somber words, and entered into a carny wedding, end quote. Whatever their legal status was, Tom and Marie quickly became inseparable. Marie also helped Parker in the carnival world by using her looks as a ballet girl in the gal shows, where she dressed provocatively and would dance to the music. Okay, so I had to look up what a ballet girl was, and here's what I found. A ballet girl, or ballet broad, was a female performer who danced or sang on an outdoor stage to attract a crowd. Their primary job was to draw people in from the midway so the carnival barker or talker could sell them tickets to the main attraction. Who knew? Anyway, Parker often worked as the talker for those shows while Marie helped draw in the crowd. Her job was to catch men's attention out front and tempt them into paying to go inside. But once men paid and went inside, the attractive girls disappeared and were replaced by less glamorous performers to strip for the men. Marie also helped Parker behind the scenes, delivering apples to Mrs. Valere and working as a short order cook at his food stands. Nash writes, quote, perhaps the most famous tale from the Parker Carnival lore is the foot-long hot dog scam, which dates from this time. In this story, Parker found his niche in the shadow world of the carnival advertising foot-long hot dogs, which had just made a hit at the Chicago World's Fair. What the customer got, however, was an appropriate-sized bun with a smidgen of frankfurter tucked in each end and a middle generously filled with slaw and onions. Whenever a sucker wised up to the jip and returned demanding his money, Parker, who presumably ate the middles himself, feigned surprise and pointed to a hunk of meat carefully arranged on the ground in front of the booth. You just dropped your meat, son, he said calmly. Now move along. Parker's friends dismissed the stunt as a myth, but Bobby Ross insisted it really happened. He also claimed that the Parkers ran a hamburger booth where the meat was stretched with so much bread and coloring that the burgers were basically bread on a bun. Nash says by age 12, Bobby spent summers working with Tom and Marie on the carnival, usually as a shill. The Parkers used a, quote, free ham drawing as a sales trick. Bobby would walk around pretending to be the lucky winner of the free ham, but the ham was really just a prop that ended up back on the Parkers' dinner table. Bobby would walk around exclaiming, Look what I want. If I can win a ham, anybody can. Bobby eventually left Granny Mott to travel full-time with Tom and Marie, and since Parker was only 16 years older, he treated Bobby as both a kind of son and a friend. Nash says Parker tried to protect Bobby from the rougher side of carnival life, especially gambling and serious grifts. When Tom and Marie took over the Pie Car, a dining car that also served as a private casino for show people, Parker kept Bobby away from it. But while Parker kept Bobby away from gambling, he himself got pulled into it. In the Pie Car and after-hours gambling tents, he developed a fascination with gambling that would later become a lifelong obsession. Nash says Parker had a brief, lucky stretch promoting Coca-Cola in Florida with Jack Kaplan's help. But once that ended, he went back to hustling up odd promotions like magic shows and a pie-eating contest against a sideshow performer billed as the fattest man on earth. Carnival life taught Parker to value now money, which was getting paid immediately, preferably upfront, instead of waiting or trusting promises. He still worked with P.Z. Hoffman sometimes selling ads, but regular honest sales didn't excite him as much, and he preferred the thrill of mixing showmanship, exaggeration, and fast-talking promises into the deal. And he loved outrageous promotional stunts. One he was especially proud of involved convincing a funeral home owner to let him bury Jack Kaplan alive in a breathable straw casket with peephole so curious people could talk to him underground. Parker had become a non-stop promoter, turning downtown Tampa into something like a carnival midway. He even convinced a furniture store to host a public sleep endurance contest to draw crowds to its display window. Parker built connections with the Moss brothers at Tampa's elegant Moss Brothers department store. He worked as Santa Claus there, drawing well-to-do families and their children into the store's toyland. He also talked the Moss brothers into putting pony rides outside their Franklin Street store and convinced them that it would bring in more customers and boost business. Nash writes, quote, working a deal with Bert Slover to borrow 4 carnival ponies and a small track, Parker then ambled into Rinaldi Printing Company on Tampa's Howard Street and asked about having tickets made on credit. For the loan of $5 during the Depression, Parker would reward Clyde Rinaldi in the 1960s by insisting that RCA use the small Tampa firm for much of the massive Elvis printing, end quote. Gabe Tucker remembers, he made Mr. Rinaldi rich. Nash says Parker became unusually close to Clyde Rinaldi, even trusting him with the truth about his Dutch background. Their friendship lasted until Rinaldi died in 1988. Meeting Clyde Rinaldi was one of Parker's few lucky breaks during the hard 1930s off-season. Life was bleak, and Marie often had to figure out how to feed all 3 of them on just 50 cents a day. On March 6, 1937, Tom and Marie both signed up for Social Security and got numbers only 1 digit apart. Parker's application is also important because it's the first official record showing him using the middle name Andrew. Nash writes, quote, he wrote that his present employer was Park Theater, a popular movie house located at 448 West Lafayette Street. His birthplace, he claimed, was Huntington, West Virginia, and in listing his parents, he gave life to 2 people who never existed, Edward Frank Parker and Mary Ida Ponzi. He signed the form at the bottom with great self-assured flourish, end quote. In the fall of 1937, Parker wanted to send Bobby back home to Granny Mott so he and Marie could travel. They planned to get by however they could, staying with carnival friends and chasing whatever luck they might find. Parker later told his brother Ad that the trip was much harder than expected. He and Marie found a country crushed by poverty, living for months on about $1 a week and often sleeping in horse stables. In the Southwest, Parker and Marie sometimes stayed on Native American reservations, and Parker hustled there too, telling fortunes and selling sparrows he painted yellow and passing them off as canaries. Even during those hard times, Parker thought about his family in Holland, but despite that, he still chose not to contact them. Parker said, I didn't want you all to know what I was doing. In fact, usually I couldn't afford the writing paper or stamps. When Tom and Marie returned to Florida, they lived with the Motts, but Parker still kept his past hidden even though he sometimes spoke in a foreign language that Bitsy wrongly thought was Yiddish. Nash writes, quote, by now, Parker's desperation led him to draw a thinner line between outright corruption and the petty larceny of the carnival, in a scam that was vaguely reminiscent of his grandfather Ponzi, and that would later serve as the basis for Joe David Brown's novel Addie Pray, adapted for the 1973 motion picture Paper Moon. Parker traveled the neighboring states posing as a Bible salesman, end quote. Byron Raphael remembers, he would go into town and read the obituaries and then have the names embossed on a box of Bibles that he got in other cities by doing work for churches. He always chose men's names because he figured the widows were soft touches. He'd walk up and ring their doorbells, ask for the husband by name, and then pretend he didn't know that he had died. And then he'd say, That's such a shame because he'd ordered this Bible and paid $5 on it. The grieving widow, moved by her husband's faith and supposed final wishes, would usually hand over the remaining money. Nash says if the widow hesitated, Parker sometimes used an even more theatrical trick, pretending to hear the dead husband's voice. Is that my Helen there? But he knew that kind of stunt was risky, so he saved it for a last resort. Raphael said he had no conscience. He thought it was funny. As the hard times continued, both Tom and Marie became bolder in scamming people. Parker would later brag about these tricks as clever ways he survived. He told Gabe Tucker about how he survived by eating produce while walking through markets. Marie had her own tricks too, stealing flour from concession stands to help keep them fed, but it wasn't just flour she'd pilfer. Her daughter-in-law, Sandra Polk Ross, said, "The truth is, Marie was a kleptomaniac all of her life. I'm not sure when it started, but she was good at it, whatever she could palm or pocket. When I first met Bob and Marie would say she wanted to go shopping, Bob would tell me to take her and keep an eye on her and pay for whatever she took, and Colonel would reimburse me." Nash says Parker's carnival years blurred his sense of right and wrong. What may have started as clever survival tricks slowly became harder to separate from outright deceit and taking advantage of others. Nash writes, quote, "During the late 1950s, in his early Hollywood days with Presley, Parker stunned the old guard studio heads when he suggested how they could really make money on their pictures, charge the audience $1.50 to get in, and another $3 to get out. It was exactly what he had done in the carnival when he staged a tent show in a cow pasture, far away from the midway, and designated one flap as the only exit. Once outside the tent, the furious patrons had a choice of walking a quarter of a mile through a field covered in cow manure or renting one of Parker's ponies to carry them through. Parker, like most of the carnies of the area, saw nothing reprehensible about it." End quote. In spring of 1954, RCA sent Parker on the road with its country acts for the RCA Country Caravan. Brad McEwen, one of RCA's Southern fieldmen, was assigned to travel with him. During long drives, Parker entertained McEwen with stories from his rough and wild carnival days in the 1930s. Parker told McEwen how he and other grifters worked crooked carnival games like Three-Card Monte and the Shell Game. They used shells and tricks to make victims think they could win when the game was rigged from the start. Parker believed grifting was all about reading people. You had to pick the right victim, sense when he was vulnerable, and strike at just the right moment. According to Byron Raphael, Parker admired Jew Murphy as one of the best grifters around. He was an old-time peddler who had turned into a master con man. Raphael remembers, "The Colonel took me to this one little carnival in Louisiana just so I could see him. Murphy would stand by this wagon full of shiny objects and he'd start by saying, 'Who'll give me $1 for one of these beautiful lighters?' And people would crowd around and give him $1. The Colonel would turn to me and say, 'Now watch how he hypnotizes people.' And it was the most amazing thing. Murphy would give somebody a clock and 30 or 40 people would start waving $5 bills over their heads. His assistant would rush through the crowd and pull that money right out of their hands." Nash says the scam made people feel like they were getting merchandise, but the prizes were always, quote, lumpies. Cheap, inferior items, not the nice clocks displayed up front. Raphael believed Parker learned much of his twisted business outlook from Jew Murphy and other old-school con men. In Parker's world, you either fooled someone or you got fooled. Raphael says, "He told me that was what life was about, and he meant it. He treated everything like a carnival." That's it for Chapter 7. Stay tuned for Chapter 8, which is titled Deeper into America. See you then.